Greetings all, D&Disability here, coming at you with my next video in my thesis series, Coping with Disabilities. So, let's begin. The first battle has been fought. You sit at the gaming table, but now what? Now, the second battle begins. Disabled players cope with their disabilities throughout the game and at the table. Adams, Konecki, Turner, Ziegel, Buckman, taken together, represent the utilization of different strategies players use to experience more or benefit from their engagement with an RPG. Whether through reflexivity, such as what Turner states, or the inclusion of the periphery into the core, such as Ziegel and Buckman state. Players interact with the game on multiple levels. For disabled players, one of these levels is disability. The monetary value from gaining real-world skills in intrapersonal communication, interpersonal communication, and problem-solving are examples of TTRPG's social capital. The reliance on the self-reflexive nature of TTRPGs, where the player is playing a character and is aware that they are acting, playing a game, and interacting with their friends, intermix with the game content, player backgrounds, and a myriad of other elements that generate both tools that help disabled players cope, but also challenges for those players to overcome. Coping with disabilities is not how self-reflexivity and gameplay happen. Rather, coping is how game narratives, social capital, and self-reflexivity are utilized by disabled players for their own benefit. The safe space of the gaming table, whether virtual or physical, is also an enabler of coping for disabilities of all types. Coping, what is it? It's defined as what TTRPGs do to help the player cope with their disabilities. Now, this term do is rather vague, but it does exactly that. It's this fiat of the game. For many disabled players, it's bound up with their act of coping. Gaming serves as a resource due to the myriad of elements, the self-reflexivity, communication skills, social capital, just to name a few, that help the game be instrumental in the disability coping process. Coping is what TTRPGs help players do. Further, the disabled player must cope to play the game to begin with. The act of coping is a continuous, reflexive process that is facilitated within the game space and is part of what makes TTRPGs so important for many disabled players. For those with invisible disabilities, the almost passing, coping may be invisible. For others with more visible physical or mental disabilities, coping may require physical aids, such as large print dice. Regardless, TTRPGs offer tools that help disabled players cope, and one must cope to some extent to play. Disabled players are no strangers to the challenge of their disabilities. However, just as important are the tools disabled players utilize to overcome them. Hugh, who has a, quote, undiagnosed Asperger's, or that is to say someone along the neurodivergent spectrum, end quote, is at odds with his impulse to speak. He sits at the table, virtual or otherwise, with his friends. They each take turns speaking, and as the game progresses, it comes to his turn. Everyone else had 1 to 5 minutes with the shopkeeper. They have asked questions, received answers, bought goods. Hugh takes this as an opportunity to practice. He spends a minute or two asking about items, buys a few things, and finishes the interaction in less than 3 minutes. While not a large interaction, it let Hugh practice not hogging the spotlight, quote unquote. He made sure to wait his turn, not speak up over others, and navigated the uncomfortable maze of social politics with aplomb. The game does not always go this way, and I quote, interpersonal politics, it's just not my strong suit, and it comes up when you're managing groups, end quote. Hugh hints at the conflict he faces, but also the safe environment the game creates. It enables a safe environment for players like you to observe, implement, and practice the means of mitigating the role of their disability at the table and in their lives. Even though the act of coping and thus play is work, TTRPGs help make that work more worthwhile. Sobi, while viewing RPGs as a community that disabled players enter into, considers themselves a member of a third-party space. For her, the game is about sharing a communal experience of the game while coping with their disabilities. And I quote, currently have autism, arthritis, and severe ADHD, end quote, that make the game a means of working through their disabilities. And I quote, I feel like every time when I do a Dungeons & Dragons session, the thing I end every session with is, hey, I hope I didn't cause anybody any issues because of anything that I can improve on. Please let me know, end quote. The struggle is not always with the disabilities themselves, but also to maintain a lack of complacency. For Sobi, the coping process is a constant and recurring process. And I quote, every time I go into a Dungeons & Dragons game, I see an opportunity to improve if I feel like I'm not holding up to par, end quote. Part of the challenge for Sobi is overcoming her own self-doubt, the not holding up to par comment. Regardless of the doubt, Sobi channels it into improving her games and ensuring a positive play experience for other players. What also became apparent throughout her interview was the role of modern game accessibility. While the books are what predominantly make up the bulk of D&D material, phenomena such as Geek and Sundry's online game series Critical Role have proved instrumental for disabled players such as Sobi. And I quote, but because I watch stuff like Critical Role and other campaigns on an online setting, since they were talking about these effects that went on, it made it to her, okay, now I know how this works, because they're talking about and explaining how, end quote. Watching live games online has provided a real-time guide for the rules and interactions of 5e D&D, and their ADHD and autism spectrum disorder, ASD, make rules, retention, and other game interactions difficult to understand when read. The online environment provides a useful alternative. Sobi struggled to improve the game experience of her and her friends at the gaming table is made easier by the live online play of groups such as Critical Role. So while Sobi struggles to cope with her own disabilities and craft a better game experience, she is not resourceless. She can learn by example, i.e. mimesis. Todd's disabilities are complicated. Also, hi Todd, welcome, this is your part. But I quote, the doctors think that that's some kind of new type of seizure that I'm having. You know, where you can hear yourself saying crazy things, you can see yourself doing crazy things, but you're not the one in control. But that makes severe Crohn's, severe rheumatoid arthritis, end quote. He struggles to engage actively in TTRPGs, but remains an active member within his community to the best of his ability. Todd seeks, and I quote, acceptance, the funny stories that come out of it, end quote. These stories make up part of his performance and are part of how he copes with his disability-induced, physically isolated life. Todd utilizes the escapism of the RPG genre to, in his words, 100% throw myself into like when I read books, end quote. For Todd, the game provides a means of coping that may be assumed for most disabled players, a means of escape from his daily pains and limited mobility caused by his debilitated condition. However, he directs the escapism toward ensuring the other players at the table have fun. He copes with his own isolation by feeling useful, quote unquote, and I quote, if they are having fun, then I am having fun, end quote. The fun of others becomes his anchor in the game. As long as he focuses on that aspect, Todd overcomes his disabilities and commits to the social performance of playing the game. Todd puts in the performative work to ignore his own pain-filled condition and make the game enjoyable for others at the table. And this is what the act of coping is. It's a continuous, reiterative process that happens before, during, after the game. And a big thank you to all the players out there that continue to do this. Right? You're not alone. It's a continual struggle. And it's a continual struggle on top of everything else that you're doing. On top of the character sheet management, on top of running games, on top of writing stories. Just keep struggling. Keep fighting.